Well, have you ever bought any item of clothing that said it was one size fits all? How well did that fit? It's serviceable and it works. You wouldn't be able to pick up that piece of clothing out of a lineup and say, that one's made for me, versus a suit that like a bespoke suit that was created for you. You would be able to recognize it on the hanger as, oh, that one's mine. The approach that I have always found to be effective when I work for organizations, and I certainly see it effective now when I'm working with clients as we're trying to help them figure what this kind of narrowed message is to figure out first who you're for so that you know how to tailor that message for them. I'm all about probabilities. I would rather get a higher proportion of the people who are already likely to want me, though they may not know about me yet, than to have to convince people who have no idea, that share no values with my organization, who may or may not have the problem that I exist to solve, who may or may not appreciate the approach that we're taking to solve it. Why would I waste my time and energy on trying to convert people who are not convertible?
So you're a smart business committed to innovation, to service and to modern marketing, and you're asking, what's next? Wondering how you can become even more innovative. My name is Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBuzz, and this is the InnovaBuzz Podcast, where we share all kinds of tips, advice and interview guests on all things innovation and leadership in modern marketing. Hi innovators, it's really great to be back. I hope you've had an awesome week so far. I certainly have. Now I'm really excited to have on the InnovaBuzz podcast as my guest today, Tamsen Webster, who is the creator of the Red Thread method to craft a message that compels change or action. She's also a change strategist and an acclaimed speaker. She's been the executive producer of the oldest and one of the largest locally organised TED Talk events in the world, and an in-demand consultant on finding the ideas that move people to action. This is another really insightful episode where Tamsen shared valuable information and tips on getting really clear on who your message is for, who you are for as a business, what stage of her two-step buying journey those people are on, and how to know when to move on to the sales stage. We also talked about how a clear understanding of how you see the world will help you differentiate yourself and help your message stand out. And we talked about the 3 key questions to ask yourself to discover your why, and the 3 questions to ask to craft your message. There's a lot there, and there was a lot of really valuable information. Without further ado, let's fly into the hive and get the buzz from Tamsen Webster. Hi, I'm your host Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBuzz, and I'm really excited to welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast today, all the way from Boston in the USA, Tamsen Webster. Tamsen is an... Hi Tamsen, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, it's a privilege to have you here. Now, you're a keynote speaker, and I think you call yourself part idea whisperer, part change strategist, and is it part something else?
Oh, magpie. I often will include in the
that was the other one.
Include in the lineup, yeah.
So you collect things, do you?
I collect shiny things, yeah.
Okay.
I say shiny ideas. I find what shines.
Yeah, great. Now, Tamsen's got a lot of experience in marketing, and she combines that with her experience in Weight Watchers, which is interesting, as a leader there to help build a structure. So she has a really simple structure for understanding, talking about and creating lasting change. And what I want to explore today a little bit is using that structure not only for creating lasting change, but also applying that to crafting a marketing message that gets your ideal clients taking action. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Discussion.
And it came from marketing. So it is very easy to apply and apply back into marketing. So I'm excited to talk about it with you.
Lovely. Now, Neen James, who was on episode 111, introduced me to Tamsen and suggested we interview you on the podcast. So big hello to Neen as well.
Oh, I love Neen James. And her new book, Attention Pays, is amazing. So
that's right. I saw yesterday I saw yesterday that it had been launched, so I must get that.
Yes, and she topped, at least in the U.S., the Amazon lists last week. So super
awesome.
Excited for.
All right. Well, before we start talking about communication and change and your method, your structure, let's find out a bit more about you as a person. So as a young child, did you have ideas of going into marketing and then becoming a speaker?
No. No, actually, growing up, I wanted to be a museum director because, that's in the lineup of astronaut, police officer, museum director. That's what everybody thinks. And so I spent a fair amount of my schooling kind of wanting to pursue that. So, degree in marketing, which I was always interested in, but also in arts administration, and particularly with a focus on visual arts. So then I found out as I started to do it that by making it my job, I didn't love it as much. And ultimately what I found that was consistent about what I loved was back to the magpie thing. I love to figure out how to help an organization reach the potential that it sees for itself and help to connect organizations with who they serve or could serve the best. And turns out that as a thing that I love to do, that's a really good match for marketing. And so eventually I settled into marketing, largely in the beginning in arts and cultural and higher education institutions, but eventually moved over to agencies and did brand strategy work, as well as digital and content marketing, message strategy, sales strategy, all of that kind of stuff. So I am, as I like to say, a recovering marketer, but it is definitely my heritage.
Yeah. And so then you kind of moved on from marketing into the speaking, and then of course the marketing message was applied to your speaking presentation.
Yeah. I mean, the speaking started probably about 15 years ago, and it started while I was still in organizations. So when I worked in higher education, I was the head of marketing and communications for a small performing arts college here in Boston. It's now part of Berklee College of Music, but it was the Boston Conservatory. And we were doing some really interesting things there, and we were asked to go to industry conferences for marketers and fundraisers in higher education and talk about what we were doing. And so that's really where I started. And then for each job that I did afterwards, I just continued to do that because I love to be able to help other people. If I figured out a better or an easier or an more effective way to do something, I want other people to do that, especially in nonprofits and cultural institutions. There's not a lot of money to go around. And so, when I figured out or stumbled across ways to make those short dollars stretch further, I wanted to make sure other people had that advantage. So it led to speaking. So I have been speaking for 15 years. And then, a couple of years ago when I decided to start my own business, that became a significant part of my income and my revenue. But still, speaking is more of the tip of the spear for my consulting. So typically if I'm speaking, yes, I'm going to conferences to let other people know about my approach and to help other people. But if I'm speaking for private clients, it's usually the leading edge of a consulting engagement where I'm working with them to figure out what their messaging and their positioning should be. I'm working with them to train their staff on how to use the structure that I developed to write more effective content, and to apply it throughout what they're doing. So it really was a natural evolution of my work.
And how important is speaking actually in marketing for those people that might have a fear of public speaking, and there's one or two of those around?
There is. And, the thing is, it makes sense. We're not wired as humans to be facing the pack, right? We're pack animals. We're supposed to be walking with the pack. So to suddenly be in a position where everybody's looking at you, that makes sense that your body is like, hey, wait a minute. I'm not sure this is what I want to be doing here. And I suffered from stage fright for years. I had a panic disorder actually for 17 years. So it was really interesting for me to, for a number of years, learn how to speak in the midst of having anxiety attacks and panic attacks. and also over time to take the feedback of successful speaking to eventually start to remove the stage fright from it. So it's kind of an interesting piece that way as well.
So how did you overcome the panic and anxiety?
Well, that's a longer story. It was interesting because my physiology is apparently such that my biology is such that my body doesn't tolerate the medications for panic and anxiety well. And so the last time I was medicated, I had to come off of it suddenly because I had a very negative reaction to the medication that was worse than the panic I was experiencing. So it really meant that I had to do a lot of mental work to figure out how could I, over time, change how I was looking at what I was experiencing so that I wasn't always triggering that panic reaction. And so there's a huge amount of what I do today that is rooted in that process. Not that it's therapy, but it is in fact understanding that when we change how we see something, we will by definition change what we do as a result.
Yeah, change our response to it.
Yeah. But you had asked a quick question about speaking for marketing. And I just want to pause there for a minute because I think speaking is an incredibly untapped avenue of content marketing for organizations. I think it really is in a lot of ways like content marketing's last frontier because in certain ways, certain people, there's a lot of people who aren't comfortable doing it, but think about what the opportunity is for speaking. I mean, from a sales standpoint alone, like how long would you have to wait to get 50 people to meet with you, 100 people to meet with you, 150 people to meet with you? And yet when you're speaking at a conference for even if it's a breakout session, you've got 50, 100, 150 people who elected to come hear you speak.
That's right.
And so for this small investment of time, you are suddenly in front of pre-qualified leads in a lot of ways. And to be able to use that.
They've self-selected themselves, haven't they?
They have. Yeah. And so if you treat that opportunity with the respect it's due and you don't try to sell them, that's very important. You work to educate them to see the world the way that you do. Now you've got an incredibly rare opportunity with, again, self-selected people to continue a conversation in a really powerful way. But it means making sure you're making the most of that opportunity when you're in front of them.
That's a really good point. And you also said something there about not selling, taking the opportunity to educate them. So we're very strong here about all the content we provide. It's education, and it needs to be exceptionally useful to the right audience, to your target audience. Otherwise, basically, that's how you build the relationship to the point where the person, when they're ready, will want to make a purchase.
Absolutely. I mean, I look at it this way. I look at it, you can look at funnels and consumer journeys and whatever, but in my mind, there's really two basic phases when it comes to marketing and sales. There's a phase where people are learning, and then there's a phase where they're doing, right? So in the learning phase, they're gathering information, they are expanding their consideration set, they are comparing options, they're really gathering information that helps them make a decision. And then it's kind of like an expanding, think of a funnel opening up. And then the other half is them winnowing it down, winning that information down, kind of deciding. That's where they're really, now comparing, that's when they're comparing exactly what they'll get and assessing value and those kinds of things. And you have to match your message to which of those mindsets that they're in. Because if you try to sell to someone who's still in the learning phase, they're going to reject you out of hand. And at the same time, when somebody's ready to make a decision, there's a point at which they're not interested in learning more and more and more. Or what they want to learn is actually really specific information. So kind of one of the first big things when it comes to thinking about your message, period, whether it's speaking or not, is really understanding who you're for and where they are in that process. Because as long as they're still in that learning mode, then you really haven't yet earned the right to speak specifically about your product and why the product or the service is superior. You've only earned the right to explain to them what the problem is as you see it, how your approach is different, and how that approach may reveal a more effective path to achieving or solving a problem, achieving a goal or solving a problem for your customer. Once they're ready to act and decide, now they want to know, well, tell me about your thing. Why is your thing better? Why is your thing different? And it's the difference between educating on an approach and selling a product. And that you really can't cross that line, because only the people that you're talking to, they decide when they flip over. You don't.
Yeah, there's so much great advice in that last comment around, I love those 2 steps. It really simplifies things and breaking it down. And as you say, recognizing that point when they're ready, which I think a lot of people don't. I had I signed up for something. I was listening to your podcast a couple of days ago, and they said, if you want this thing, I can't remember exactly what it was. It was a lead magnet, basically. Sign up at this website. And I thought, that sounds interesting. It sounds like something, and it was educational. So I signed up and received that. The very next day, I received a sales email. And I thought, I think I might unsubscribe from that.
See, that's the thing. And the solution is so easy. It's to end any educational piece of content with a question, with 2 options. One is to learn more. One is to take a step that indicates to you, the marketer, they want that they're flipping over. Because there's a difference between I want to learn more, tell me more about this particular approach versus, hey, click here and see the product specifications. When someone's looking at product specifications, now they're starting to be interested in your product specifically. But if it's just educational, don't assume that means they're actually that they're ready to buy anytime soon. And that's a mistake I see happen over and over and over again.
And it's so simple when you even for me now, when you outline it like that, it really is so simple. All right, so
I like to make things simple.
I love to make things simple too.
15 years in marketing with organizations that didn't have any money to market with, you start to learn how to make things simple really quick.
Well, I think that leads naturally on to what the question that's in my mind that I was going to ask a little while ago, but we kind of went on this approach, which was really great. But that's how do you stand out from the noise? So there's so much stuff in there. People get hundreds or more emails every day. The internet, you go on the internet and there's literally millions and millions of possibilities where you can go. If you do a search for something, pages of information come up. So how do you stand out from that noise? I mean, not get to number 1 on Google and all this sort of thing that people focus on, but actually have a message that people say, oh, yes, that sounds interesting. I want to find out more. And then how do you get them to take some action with that?
That is a giant question. and I think I have the answer to that in pieces. And the approach that I take to this is quite counter to what a lot of the conventional wisdom is. And for me, the answer is to actually narrow the message down, not to broaden it. And I think we've got this built-in fear that if we narrow what we talk about, that people won't find us. But in fact, when you focus your message, you're able to get, the kind of a clarion call of a message out there that actually does cut through the noise. Because it's when people try to write a message or build a platform or find positioning that just kind of takes in this sweeping approach to who they're trying to talk to. It's the same thing as, well, have you ever bought any item of clothing that said it was one size fits all?
Yeah.
How well did that fit? it's serviceable and it works, but you don't pick it up. You wouldn't be able to pick up that piece of clothing out of a lineup and say that one's made for me. Versus a suit that you, like a bespoke suit that you had that was created for you, you would be able to recognize it on the hanger as, oh, that one's mine. And so the approach that I have always found to be effective when I work for organizations, and I certainly see it effective now when I'm working with clients as we're trying to help them figure what this kind of narrowed message is to figure out first who you're for so that you know how to tailor that message for them. Because I'm all about probabilities. I would rather get a higher proportion of the people who are already likely to want me, though they may not know about me yet, than to have to convince people who have no idea, that share no values with my organization, who may or may not have the problem that I exist to solve, who may or may not appreciate the approach that we're taking to solve it. Why would I waste my time and energy on trying to convert people who are not convertible? I would rather have a much better understanding of who I'm likely to get and then go hard and tight and fast after those people. So I think the most important first question for figuring out how to stand out in the marketplace is to ask yourself, who are we really for? Not who's our target market, but who are we really for? And I found that when I'm working with clients, there's an exercise that we go through to help identify that. And the first is to identify the category of people. And sometimes, that's basically where a lot of times people stop, right? on the persona or on the target market or on the segment or whatever. They stop at, moms, in the 25 to 34 category or 25 to 34 age group. But then I asked 3 more questions, which sound simple, but they are not easy to answer. And the 3 questions are this. First, of that category of people, what do they want that they would tell you that they want that you can help them get? What are they trying to do? What are they trying to achieve? What problem are they trying to solve? And the caveat here is you can't answer with your product, your service, or anything like that, because that's not what they're not walking around the world saying, I really need your widget. They're saying, I really need an easier way to do X, right? So what is that thing that they want? The second question is, what do they value? And here's the caveat here. It needs to be something that is a shared value with you. Like you, the organization. So what is something that they value about themselves, about their lives, about whatever it is that they're trying to achieve with that want? What is it they value that's very important to them as part of getting it? So for instance, I had a client who they decided that the people that they were for really wanted to publish information as a means for furthering their careers, right? So you can think about it as glorified content marketing. And the value that they identified was credibility. The people who they were for valued credibility, because if they didn't value credibility, they weren't going to pay the premium that this particular company's products represented. But the reason why the premium was there, because the premium ensured the quality that would give credibility. There was an interesting discussion I had with them at the time, because I said to them, would you agree that there are certain people who want to publish to further their career for whom credibility is not a value? And they're like, of course. I said, will those people who don't value credibility ever truly be your customers or potential customers or prospects? And they're like, no. I'm like, and how much time have you spent? How much money have you spent trying to talk to those people and convince them of something that they're just never going to be convinced of, that credibility is important? So this is why that value piece is so important. It needs to be something that they value, that is a shared value of your organization. And again, just like the want, it needs to be something that they would readily agree that they have. So it can't be something that you wish that they had. It needs to be something they actually have. And then the third thing that helps really get clarity around who you're really for is the third question is, what are they struggling with? And again, it isn't, the struggle is not going to be the fact that they don't have your product or service yet. It's going to be, I don't know how to do this, or I'm trying to achieve this goal, but I can't figure out how to do it in a way that supports my value, or something like that. But again, it has to be something they would readily agree that they are struggling with. I sometimes I work with companies who are have things that help, for instance, with an employee engagement. So let's say they want their teams to be more engaged. They really value the role of individual managers, but they're struggling with how can they make sure that those managers have the skills that they need in order to be fully, in order to lead those engaged teams. See how that works?
Yeah.
Now that I know that, then now it becomes much, much easier to understand what the messages that I need to build there. But it really starts with that crystal clear understanding at almost at a worldview level, at a mindset level. Who is it that you're talking to?
I love that. I've been doing a lot of work recently with a mastermind group that I'm involved in to help them identify their ideal client. And we go through an exercise that is actually a lot more detailed than that, but we do cover a lot of those areas. But I love the simplicity of that, and I love how you put caveats on that to focus the thinking in terms of, no, it's not your product that is the need, or it's not your product that is the value. It's something else. It's something deeper than that. Yeah. It's because like they've got an issue or a problem, and maybe you've got the solution, but
exactly, because they're not, there are going to be subsets of your people that have already decided, like, that actually are, that are much closer to making that decision. Remember that two-step of learning versus, doing and deciding. And those people are willing to hear about your product right out of the gate. But if they're not, then you have to start where they are. And rather than have them come to you, here's where it flips. You have to go to them, at least philosophically is what I'm, figuratively, you're going to them. And then you're kind of going back and you're instead of kind of standing on the other side of this gap, looking at them saying, hey, come on over. I promise the gap isn't as you think it is. You're actually going over to meet them, and then you're guiding them across. And that's really a shift that I think is really important.
Okay. So that's kind of the start of building the message. Having that information, how do you translate that then into a message? Sure.
So the inspiration for the structure that I built, and it's something I call the red thread, based on the idiomatic expression that is in any number of different languages that talk about the thing that connects everything, the thing that makes things make sense. It is based largely in the way that we as humans understand and code information, which is essentially as a story. And all good stories start with the thing that the main character wants. What is that holy grail? What is their quest? And so the first place that when you're thinking about a message, you need to start is, again, not necessarily, the message doesn't start with what you want people to do. It needs to start with, why would they pay attention to you in the first place? And that's their goal. That's the audience's goal. So when you're putting a message together, the easiest thing for you to answer first is, well, what is it that we actually want them to do? So a story that I love to tell is actually is the story of De Beers diamonds, right? So De Beers has a worldwide monopoly on diamonds. Prior to the 1930s and 40s, people didn't buy diamond engagement rings. But now, of course, if you or your listeners are married or have been engaged, the vast majority of you, there was a diamond somewhere involved in that matrimonial transaction. And when I ask audiences about this, I always say, well, who told you to buy the diamond? And then usually someone was like, well, De Beers did. I'm like, yeah, they did. De Beers did. So, the reason why De Beers needed people to buy diamonds was that, like I said, in the 1930s and 40s, people didn't buy diamonds. And on top of that, there is no intrinsic value to a diamond whatsoever. The value of a diamond comes, up until the 19th and 30s and 40s, in De Beers' ability to restrict access to them. So the value is based on restricted supply. But De Beers, being, wise business people, said, well, okay, we have the worldwide monopoly, but, we'd love to make sure that the value is coming from someplace else. Can we find someplace else to get this really sticky value in? I said, well, yeah, what's the other half of the economics graph? There's supply and then there's demand. So they could restrict supply, but they were saying, well, what can we do to increase demand for diamonds? And so they went and said, okay, well, first let's look at categories of people who might buy diamonds. Where do we put diamonds? Diamonds go in jewelry. Okay, well, where do we know that most people, at least at the time, when do most people buy jewelry? Well, most people buy jewelry when they're getting married. Okay, could we do something with that? And so they decided to start to create demand for diamonds. And so the first thing they did was actually really a content marketing campaign. They started to place diamonds on the hands of famous people, on socialites, on making sure that when engagement announcements were posted, the fact that it was a diamond was featured prominently. So the people started to see this. And then in 1947, they came out with the campaign that still exists to this day. You know it as well as I do. What's the tagline for De Beers? A diamond is forever. So what did they do and I can explain the rest of this, but the first thing, the first thing they ultimately had to decide is, what do they want people to do? Buy diamond rings. Now, could they just go out there and say, buy diamond rings? I'm sure there's plenty of people out there who said, hey, go buy diamond rings. But what was so powerful is they actually, if you think about it this way, at some level, they had to have backed up and said, why would they buy them? And that's where we get to this first piece of this message, which is the goal. So if you think about why someone would buy a ring in the first place, if they're getting married, like what do they want when they're buying a ring? Well, they want to give a symbol of their love, right? Their symbol of their commitment to the person they're about to get married to. And so when we're talking about a message for your own business, you need something like that. What is, they don't want to buy a diamond ring if that's not in the consideration set, but they do want to give a symbol of their love.
Yeah.
It could be a goal
just to jump in there, because I think there's something very clever in that, and I'd never really thought about this before, but in that example, so when people decide to get married, I mean, the intention is that it's forever, and so diamonds are forever. So it actually talks even at an unconscious level to the symbol and the need. Or the desire.
Sure as heck does. Yeah, exactly. And so I'll show, as we talk about each of the pieces, I'll continue to use that example to really explain all this, because you're depending on what somebody does. The goal could be we want to stand out from the marketplace. It could be we want operational efficiencies. I'm trying to solve the problem of discord between my sales and marketing team. I'm trying to get more clients to convert for my content marketing. I mean, you see. That's a whole variety of different goals, but they all need to satisfy that requirement of, is it something that your audience, your customers would readily agree that they want? And the reason why that's so important is because just the way that we're wired as humans, we don't readily unwant something that we want, right? So I often, given my background with Weight Watchers, it's like, well, if you love cake, right, you're just not going to suddenly unlove cake. Like that doesn't, maybe over time, but quickly, which is all you've got when you've got, marketing or a sales message you've got to get out there, you're not going to be able to do that. So by starting with something that your audience would want and would readily agree they want, you're starting your message with an understanding of, I've just offered you an irresistible outcome to what is coming next. You don't know what's coming next, but I've offered you an irresistible outcome, right? So I'm, if I know coming in, if I'm putting a message together and say, hey, we can all agree we want more qualified leads coming from our marketing. Hey, I can help you get there. People are going to be like, okay, if that's something that they want. And that goal is almost always some combination of that want and that struggle that we talked about when we were talking about who you're for. Now, of course, a goal, in order to really be worth it, any goal worth its salt and any story worth its salt has a problem that stands in the way. And so the thing when we're putting a message together is to really understand, what is the problem that's out there? What is the real underlying reason, as your company sees it, that people aren't achieving that goal effectively? or in the best way. So if we go back to De Beers, we can look at that situation and say, well, what they identified was the fact that, at the time, people were, they gave a ring so that they thought that the ring mattered, but they weren't really paying attention to the kind of ring, right? So what De Beers, if I reconstruct it, and De Beers obviously didn't use my process to do this back in 1947, but if we look at it, they really said to themselves, you know what? There's an opportunity for them to have an even better symbol of commitment if they don't look just at the ring as a symbol, but if they look at the kind of ring as a symbol. And so, companies and your listeners can do this too, because, what you're looking at is, of course, there's going to be the barriers to that goal that your clients and customers know about. There's the things, it almost always comes down to some combination of time, money, and other people, right? Yeah. Are the reason why you're not getting what you're trying to get. But where you can really differentiate, not to mention that, back in the, where you're identifying your customer, who you're for, that, each of your answers to the questions of what they want, what they value, and they struggle with are also ways to differentiate. But with this point of the problem, that's a real opportunity for you to differentiate from the marketplace, because this is an opportunity for you to say, most people look at the situation this way. We look at it this way. So for instance, let's say that you sell content marketing services and you say most people, when they're trying to figure out how to get their content marketing to convert more, are looking at the quality of the individual services or the individual pieces of their content. They're looking at making, they're focusing on, how, let's say they're focusing on quantity. How do I have enough blog posts in this place? Do I have enough, this thing in the other place? And you can say, but we look at it as saying, quantity is important because you need to, get the algorithms of Google paying attention. But we see it that quality is also necessary, right? So what you're looking for with the problem is really a problem of incomplete perspective. And what you're looking for is this incomplete perspective that is getting in the way of that irresistible outcome, right? So this incomplete perspective is the way that the customers are, or that the market, is another way to do it, is currently looking at the situation that is blocking their view of a potentially better way to get what they want. So, you can think of it as a classic forest and the trees metaphor. If somebody's so focused on the tree that they can't see the path through the forest, that's essentially what you're trying to do, is to say, not what problem do we solve? That's a different question. Yeah. This is, what's the problem of perspective that's getting in the way? How do we see the situation differently than most people, or how do we see the situation more fully than other people do? Now from there, a lot of times people say, well, hey, once you've got the problem, now I can jump to my solution. Now I can say, well, let's just buy De Beers diamonds, right? Yeah. Not quite. And this is where De Beers, and why I love this example so much, because instead of a tagline that said, De Beers, #1 in quality, they came up with that wonderful tagline, a diamond is forever. It is like, it's an incontrovertible truth, right? I mean, my 9-year-old was looking at some slides I was building for a talk, and he was asking me about that phrase, and he was like, oh, well, he's like, it's true. Yeah. And I'm like, yeah, if a 9-year-old agrees with it, then you've found a pretty good one. What you're trying to find there is a belief, a fact that's true about the world, that once people understand and agree with it, makes it impossible for them to ignore that problem of perspective. So think back to De Beers. If I agree that a diamond is forever, and it's kind of hard not to, ask my son. And if I still want what I want, which is to give a ring as a symbol of my commitment, it now becomes impossible for me to ignore that the kind of ring also matters, right? So if I want better quality leads, to convert out of my content marketing, then I as the message maker needs to put out an incontrovertible truth that makes it impossible for the person I'm talking to continue to focus only on the quantity of the content that they're putting out there. right? So it could be something like quality content leads to quality leads, or the quality of your leads, is directly related to your quality of content. Maybe you as a company have done that research and you can show that. But it's finding this, and I call it the idea, this truth that is a statement of fact, belief, it's discovery, but it's something that makes that problem impossible to ignore. And a diamond is forever is my favorite example of that.
Yeah.
So now you've got three pieces of this message. You've got what people want, what's the problem of perspective that's getting in the way, and what's this idea that makes that problem impossible to ignore. Now, once they're, what you've done now you've made it really uncomfortable for them because you're like, well, if I want to give a ring as a symbol of my commitment and I believe a diamond is forever, what does that mean I should do? And obviously what you want is exactly what happened in the whole marketplace for De Beers, is everyone came to their own conclusion that the stone is the symbol of that commitment. And which now led people to the action that De Beers wanted, which is to buy diamond rings. So if I'm back to that content marketing example, if people want better quality leads converting other content marketing, you've made it clear that they need to focus on quality of content, not just quantity, because you've discovered through your research that the higher the content quality, the higher the quality of the lead. Right? And then they're going to say, well, what do I do with that? You're going to say, well, you need a content marketing system that allows you to evaluate the quality of your content. Let's say, for instance, just inventing a new product here. And so the people, great, how do I do that? Well, here at XYZ Content Marketing Services, we've developed a process that does X. And so now what you've done is people have come to their, you've planned it, but you have essentially rebuilt this idea in their head. And that's the key. And when it comes, and I promise this is circling back to differentiation, when you have a message that's that clear, where you say, when you're putting something together, and you're able to find that piece of it, whether it's a diamond is forever or something about, the problem of perspective, the people whom you're for start to find their place in it. And because you've made, put it this way, any company, any product, any idea is born out of that same process. Here's what I mean. Your company, started because somebody wanted to achieve something, a goal, and they were frustrated with how other people were pursuing that, the perspective that other people were taking. So they took a different perspective. Why? Because they believed something, the idea, which meant that they decided to approach things this way. That's the change, which allowed them to develop certain products and services, which I'm going to call generally the actions. So the thing is, if you can go back and reconstruct for yourself, like, why is it that we do what we do in the way that we do it? You have ready-made an actual map of your differentiation. And if you focus your messaging on those pieces, on telling that story in all the different ways it shows up, you can't help but differentiate, because it's going to be really hard for anybody else to come and put those exact same pieces together in exactly the same way.
Yeah, that's great advice.
It's just, I found it works over and over and over.
Yeah. I'm also curious, like, there's a lot of steps in that process of getting from, let's say, finding or learning about that diamonds are forever, and then associating diamonds with diamond ring and with the situation you're in, which is about to get married. What are the steps in the messaging that prompts people to take action, and where's it appropriate to ask for action of a certain kind?
Well, so that's very thoughtful of you, because I think the process of figuring out your messaging for me is very much layered. I mean, the thing that I think is also fairly counterintuitive with the approach I've always taken with marketing is that I don't believe that anybody has to fully understand the brand or all of its messages and how they all work together, except for the brand itself. And I think we spend a lot of time trying to make sure that every last thing is cohesive to every last person, but that's bananas, because that doesn't make any sense. As long as somebody, it's the opposite of, it's the opposite of the idea that somebody has to understand the whole elephant. They don't. The only person who has to understand the elephant of the brand is the brand, and as long as the people you're going to have certain people who are really looking for that tusk. And as long as they can find the tusk and you're the best tusk for them, great. You're going to have people who are looking for the tail. And if sometimes they stand back and they go, oh, I didn't realize that this had a tail too. As long as then they can see the connection, that's great. But I think we spend so much time thinking like, well, how do we market the brand? And it's like, why are you marketing the brand? Because in a lot of cases, the only people who care about the brand are the high-level investors. Do you see Berkshire Hathaway marketing the brand? No. Go look at their website. Just for kicks and giggles, go to berkshirehathaway.com and you will see the opposite of brand marketing. Their website looks like it's from 1998. I'm not even kidding you. And yet that's the website of one of the wealthiest men in America, Warren Buffett. But they don't market the brand. And so the steps are really simplified down for what I said is first, figure out who you're for. Now, you may have different groups of people who you're for. And for a particular product, there are going to be people who are closer to having purchased it, further away. And so you're going to want to think through what are the messages that we need to build for those people. And sometimes you're going to need to prioritize and say, listen, where the people who are going to want this are they don't really even understand that there's a problem. They don't really even understand that there's another way to look at this. So that the focus of your marketing in the early days is really going to be on content and on marketing that focuses on, hey, there's another way to look at this situation. As they become more familiar, then you can start to introduce things like, and there are different specific approaches that we can take. So as much as in the moment it might sound like, oh, that's a lot of steps, ultimately it's about figuring out who you're for. And then for any given message, whether that's a high level or at a really tactical level, like, let me write a blog post, it's really just figuring out those 5 statements that create that red thread. It's what's the goal? What's the customer's goal? What's the problem or perspective that's getting in the way? What's the idea that makes that problem impossible to ignore? What's the change in thinking or behavior that must result, or that makes sense as a result? And then finally, what are the actions that are needed to create that change? And that you can do on the back of a napkin. And I do it on a regular basis. But it's also something that for a company, I've worked with clients that have been struggling with a branding process or positioning process for like 6 months, a year, and they've invested hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I have found over and over again that all you need is about a half a day. With the right people in the room, you can figure this out for your own company in a shorter amount of time. Why? Because this is the operating system of the company. We spent so much time focusing on the brand and what is the brand and what should the brand be. But if we think about the fact that the brand is the sum total of people's experiences with you, we actually need to look before the brand. We need to look beneath the brand. And we need to look at what are the kind of internal codes and commands, the assumptions, the beliefs, the ways of thinking that lead to what those interactions actually are. And that's what that red thread is, because a company, people, individuals, everything is driven by this set of concepts. What does somebody want? Why aren't they getting it? What do they believe to be true? What will they do differently as a result? How are they going to do that? And so if you can figure that out, and it's a lot simpler than you think it is because you're already operating from those codes, then you've really unlocked the key to an enormously powerful and, more importantly, enormously elastic and flexible and able to evolve understanding of what your company is that allows you to capture that brand more effectively.
Yeah, that's great advice. And then those 5 steps, that really gives a complete framework for, I know you use it for presentations and speaking, and it definitely would work for articles, blog posts, and messaging, any marketing messaging. So that's really great. And we'll have a link to your website. I know you've got it on your website as well in the notes. Now, I'm conscious of the time. I could go on for ages, but I'm conscious of the time. So I think it's time we moved on to the Buzz, which is our innovation round, and it's designed to help our audience who they're primarily innovators and leaders in their field, and we want to help them with some tips from your experience. So I've got 5 questions, and hopefully you'll give us some really insightful answers that will inspire people to go out and do something awesome.
Oh, no pressure, but I'll do my best.
None at all. All right. So what's the number one thing you think anyone needs to do to be more innovative?
Understand how they see the world.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And that may seem, I just think that if we want to change somebody else's worldview, which is the key to getting them to change what they do, we have to understand our own. So if you want to change somebody else's mind, you have to know your own, both personally and organizationally. Yeah.
And that's so simple to say, and it's actually very, very intense if you actually go through that exercise. What's the best thing you've done to develop new ideas or products?
When I have been in that position, what I've always felt most helpful is to go all the way back to who am I for? What do they want? What are they struggling with that I can help them get? And then once I understand that and I start to break it down in those pieces, there's almost always a new thing that results. And in fact, it happened with a client the other day. We were talking, we were building a talk together, and when we could have restructured that goal, problem, idea, when we got to the change, she's like, I just had an idea for a whole new project that I can go after. It was separate from the talk, but she's like, oh my goodness, I see this huge opportunity now. Now that I understand how I think, I see where I can go do something with it differently. And so not only were we building the talk, she actually came up with a new idea. And I live for those days.
Yeah, that's exciting when that happens, isn't it? And it comes back a little bit to the understanding how you see the world. And I made kind of a flippant comment that was really deep. But when you do that work and when you understand how you see the world, it transforms so many other things, and it puts you in a position where all of a sudden you can see those ideas come up in that sort of discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I did some research on where the red thread comes from, and the use of it, at least in Sweden, which is where I first heard it, is based in the Greek myth of Theseus and the Minotaur. And the red thread is what Theseus used to trace his path through the maze that the Minotaur lived in, so that he could retrace his path and lead the others that were also in the maze out to safety. And so this is why I chose that as the metaphor for the work that I do, because when we understand the steps that we took to reach an idea, then it's a lot easier to lead other people along that same path so they can reach the same conclusions that we did.
That's right. And there's a great TED talk you gave that was Slay the Dragon, Save the City, which outlines that. Yeah. So we'll have a link to that in the show notes as well, so people can go listen to that or watch that if they haven't already done so. So what's your favorite tool or system for improving productivity and allowing you to be more innovative?
You know, the thing that works best for me is time blocks. So the Pomodoro technique, that if there's a day where I really need to get stuff done, then I find nothing better than to force myself into 20 or 25-minute blocks of having to rotate through a number of different projects. I think our instinct sometimes is I need to get something done, so I'm going to stay with something until it's done. But I actually find that when I need to get more done, if I work on 3 or 4 things kind of in a rotation throughout the day in shorter blocks, part of my brain continues to work on it. So even though I'm working on each individual thing less, I'm getting much more done in the time frame.
That's fascinating. All right. So what's the best thing what's the best way to keep a project or a client on track?
I find finite sets of deliverables. I think that when we know that somebody's kind of always out there and always available, things don't quite move. And so what I found really useful is to always define projects in the very clear steps with a very clear outcome, which allows people, once they're at that outcome, to say, okay, well, what's the next step after this? You introduce the next step, and they either want to take it or they don't. And so that way, nobody's wasting time. If they want to go to the next step, they will. If they don't, then you're not wasting time and money kind of holding on to like, hey, how you doing? Just checking in. So I keep things in modules, and that's something that I learned even back in even when I was working within organizations, that we would always modularize our products rather than trying to sell like one huge, $600,000 engagement. We'd break it down into smaller pieces and say, well, step one, yes, we will sell it to you at that full price, but actually what we'll do is also sell it in these smaller pieces, these smaller chunks, so that you can decide to cut off and go do something else if you want. And almost always they ended up buying it all. And of course we priced it in such a way that when they did it that way in pieces, they ended up paying more. So, but they felt better about it, and it was moving at the pace they wanted it to, which that I think is most important. If a client feels like they're driving the pace, they're almost always happier.
Yeah, that's great advice. Yeah. Let the client drive the pace and be flexible to serve them in that way. All right. Now, I think you've already answered this, but maybe you could summarize it again for us. And that's, what's the number one thing anyone can do to differentiate themselves?
Yeah, I'd say that it's understand how you see the world in a way that nobody else does. I mean, it really is. Anchor your messaging on why you do what you do in the way that you do it. And it's deeper than just Simon Sinek's why. I don't believe organizations have just one why. That why is contextual. There's a why are you doing this at all? And that's what goals you're trying to achieve and what problems you're trying to solve. There's why is that important to you? Those are the beliefs, the values, the fundamental discoveries that you've made. There's why is it different from other people, and that comes to the perspective. So there isn't just one why. There's at least three, and those add up to why the thing that you do is different. So don't stop at one why. Understand why you do what you do in the way that you do it. Understand what you help people achieve, why your perspective on that is different, and why you believe that perspective is the best one. And then you will have made the case for why your approach, your products and your services are different and or more effective.
Yeah, great advice. So that's really digging deeper on the why, your why approach from Simon Sinek. Yeah. Asking why 5 times, which is a technique used in quality control and Kaizen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just find it's like, but there's kinds of whys. And I think that's where sometimes people I'm sure you've done this too. You do the 5 why exercise, and then sometimes you start to get into this like infinite loop. And so what I've found that, and you're just like, okay, this isn't getting us anywhere. But when I found that I started to ask different kinds of whys, like why would this benefit someone? Not the features and benefits, but why does this help somebody out? Now all of a sudden you start to reveal like, we as a company exist to solve this problem. I would say I like to help people close gaps between potential and reality. I've done it every place that I've been, because there's a thing that they see the reality, and they just can't figure out how to get from one place to the other. So no matter how many different ways that manifests, okay, we're trying to figure out how do we get the market that we want to notice us. That's also a gap between potential and reality. So it becomes much easier for me to recognize the people that I can serve and the ways that I can help, because I have understood that why. But that's true for the other 2 kinds of whys as well.
All right. Well, thanks for getting us through the buzz. Now, what's the future for you and your business?
I love what I do. To me, it's like I get to solve a mystery and do a giant crossword puzzle and untie a Gordian knot every day. I love figuring this piece out. So the future of my business is figuring out how to do that and continuing to do that on a larger scale. Moving from a lot of the one-on-one individual coaching that I'm doing and working towards consulting with companies so that we can get them kicked off with a positioning and differentiation strategy that's more usable for them long term than some kind of simple brand tagline, but also to help train their staff into how to build content that supports that effectively over time as well.
Okay, sounds exciting. We'll keep watching. So what's the number one piece of advice you'd give to any business owner who wants to be a leader in innovation and in their field?
Does it sound like a broken record? Understand why you do what you do the way that you do it. You understand that, and you will stay away from features and benefits to lead with, which is always going to be a race to cost and price. If you want to transact on value, then you have to understand why your worldview is different and better for the people you serve than the alternatives that are currently out there.
Yeah, well, that's certainly a very strong recurring theme there and very strong message. Thanks. This has been really great, Tamsen. I've really enjoyed this. Where can people reach out to you and say thanks for what you shared with us today?
Oh, absolutely. Best places in social, I'm on Twitter and LinkedIn. On Twitter, I'm at Tamadeer. LinkedIn, Tamsen Webster. I'm the only one in the world, so it's usually pretty easy to find me. Yeah. But also my website, TamsenWebster.com.
All right. We'll have links to those in the show notes as well. And finally, who would you like me to interview on a future InnovaBuzz podcast and why?
Oh, I think somebody that would make a fabulous future guest for you, if you haven't already spoken with him, is a wonderful gentleman by the name of Jay Akunzo. He does another podcast as well called the Unmistakable Creative. I might be getting that wrong, but Jay is just an amazing guy. He's so interested in creativity and thinking, but his approach to it is quite different from other people's. And he also has a really interesting perspective on the role podcasts can play as a marketing strategy and differentiation strategy as well.
That sounds fascinating. So Jay, if you're listening to this, if you happen to be listening, keep an eye on your inbox. We'll send you an invitation courtesy of Tamsen Webster. So thanks very much, Tamsen, for sharing your time and your insights with us today. I've really enjoyed this. I've got heaps of notes. I've learned a lot. I'm going to go back and listen to it again straight away because I've had a lot of ideas that I can immediately incorporate into what we do, and I hope that's the same for our listeners. I wish you all the best for the future, and let's keep in touch.
Thank you so much. I would love that, and I'm so glad it was of use. That's what I love to do.
That certainly was very insightful and a lot of fun. I liked the clarity and simplicity of the structures that Tamsen shared with us. I hope you enjoyed hearing from Tamsen as much as I enjoyed the interview. All the ideas and tips that Tamsen shared with us can be found at InnovaBuzz.co/TamsenWebster. That is TamsenWebster. TamsenWebster, all lowercase, all one word, InnovaBuzz.co/TamsenWebster. Now you'll also find contact information for getting in touch with Tamsen there, as well as links to her website and the talk, Slay the Monster, Save the City, which we referred to. Tamsen suggested I interview Jay Akunzo, founder of Unthinkable Media, on a future InnovaBuzz podcast. So Jay, keep an eye on your inbox for an invitation from us to the InnovaBuzz podcast, courtesy of Tamsen Webster. Stay connected. Head on over to iTunes or Stitcher or Pocket Casts and subscribe to the InnovaBuzz podcast so you make sure you'll never miss another episode. We'd also love you to leave us a review, because what you think matters. Take some of the ideas you've heard today and apply them in your business. Any thoughts, ideas, suggestions or questions, share them in the comments below the blog post. And remember, if you want to get better marketing results than you ever have, join our fantastic LinkedIn community at the Transformational Marketing Academy. All you have to do is go to InnovaBizz.co/TMAC. It's free to join. Hope to see you there soon. Until next time, I'm Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBuzz. Remember to be awesome and keep innovating.